So you're on a day out, as indeed am I. I'm here at the Museum of Welsh Life in St Fagans, just outside of Cardiff. And as a courtesy to your friends and family who have suffered so greatly following you around with a backpack full of lenses all the time, you decide to bring only one lens with you for your day out, or indeed your hike, or a bit of travelling. But what do you bring? Well, ideally you want something a little bit longer than a 24-70 because you want to be able to zoom in a little bit further on things that are a bit far away. Well, what about a 24-105? This is the 24-105 f4 for L mount from Panasonic. But alternatively, you could go for one of these. The brand new 28-200 f4 to 7.1. Now these aren't strictly directly comparable, but they are, because for me their use case is effectively the same, but there's a lot of differences between the two. They're similarly priced. Let's go and have a look. So I've owned the 24-105 for quite a while now, and overall I've been very pleased with it, except in terms of its size. It is a large lens, and you are paying the price for that constant f4 aperture, which is very useful if you are the sort of person who wants to isolate your subjects on your day out. You're going to take photos of your kids, for example. f4 can be really nice for that. At the 105 end, it does give you a benefit, but the downside is the size. It's quite notably larger than the 28-200. It's 50% heavier, and that makes a difference when you're only packing one lens, and makes even more of a difference if you're packing multiple lenses. Now, as you can probably tell, the clouds have rolled in and it's gotten quite a bit colder here quite quickly, and because of that a bee landed on my leg to try and stay warm, which is a nice opportunity, seeing as how I stood there for 15 minutes looking a bit weird, to test the macro capabilities of these two lenses, and they're effectively the same. They both do half life-size reproduction, and there's no real difference in using either of them for that, and apparently I've cut my finger somewhere. Then I don't know. Something worth noting if you do shoot macro and you're going to use these lenses rather than a dedicated macro lens is that they do their best work at different focal lengths. This at 105, this at 28. So you're getting very different perspectives. This is more compressed, this is much more sort of distorted and wide angled. Which you prefer is entirely up to you. I probably prefer the results of this, but I don't dislike this, and it's very much just down to taste preferences. Now, if you think you might want to photograph some animals on your day out, well, really the only choice is the 28-200. It's still not a wildlife lens, but it is notably better than the other lens in terms of magnification at the long end. And if you're going out and you're walking in the countryside and you're going to photograph something like a field of lovely lambs, as there are behind me, then yeah, the 28-200 is a better choice, and it's pretty good when you get a large enough animal in the frame. it comes to the optics of these two lenses, they perform very similarly, which is kind of surprising, but also not so surprising. Neither of them are a pro lens, and they do perform very, very similarly across the zoom ranges, and obviously the 28-200 goes further. The one thing I would note is that the colour rendition between the two lenses is very slightly different. I think the 28-200 is closer to the 20-60 in terms of how it renders colour, and I do prefer it. I'm assuming this is down to the lens coatings, but here's a couple of comparison photos where you can see it's very slightly different between the two lenses. So if you're thinking of using one of these two lenses for video, and right now I'm filming myself with the 28-200, you can see it's quite tight for a handheld shot, but I wanted to demonstrate something, and that is that the variable aperture, although obviously it's going to cause you some light and depth of field problems, doesn't have that stepping issue that you get with many variable aperture lenses on other camera systems in particular, and I'll demonstrate that now. You can see that it's got a very smooth change through the aperture range. It's got a stepless aperture system, and that's very, very nice on a variable aperture zoom lens. Something fairly odd to note, I suppose, is that this has a much heavier zoom ring than the 28-200, probably because it's a larger diameter and heavier and has larger pieces of glass in it. But it does mean that when you're zooming whilst filming, it's notably harder with this lens to avoid twisting your camera at the same time. That's not a problem I have on the 28-200. The 28-200 is much looser. It feels more like the Fujifilm 16-55 that I had in the past. It's got a very sort of loose zoom ring, but there is a downside to that, considering that the 28-200 does not have a zoom ring lock switch, whereas this does. Which maybe seems a little bit pointless on account of this is much tighter, but, you know, something to note. So of these two lenses, what would be my choice? Well, it's probably fairly obvious. I already own this and it's only been out a week. But that's, for me, the extra focal length of this is hugely beneficial. It means that I don't need to take a longer lens alongside this in order to photograph landscapes here in Wales, where longer lenses tend to be the preferred choice. Things tend to be quite far away and we have humbler mountains here. But it has other benefits too. It's 50% lighter, it's notably smaller, it's a little bit cheaper, and I prefer the colour rendering from it. I also think it has slightly better contrast, curiously, so there's definitely something different in the lens coatings on this lens, which isn't surprising. It's a newer lens. In terms of many of the other features of them, they're very, very similar. The optical stabilisation performs very much identically, to be honest. The autofocus speed doesn't really make a huge amount of difference from what I've tested. I think this is faster, but in real world usage you're not going to notice the difference. So it really does come down to your use case for the lens. For some people this will make more sense, but for me it's definitely this, and this is the one I will be keeping of the two. But what are your thoughts? I'd be curious to know, particularly if there's another lens that you would prefer instead of either of these. If you're on the L mount, obviously there are many options on different lens mounts as well, but please do let me know down in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and probably not from the Museum of Welsh Life next time, but it is nice here.